Hi, let's start the recording for assessment criteria 2.2. So today we're going to look at the theory recording for assessment criteria chapter 2.2. All right. So by now, I'm sure you would have done all the exams for chapter 1 and written your short notes, as well as you watched all the videos and read the recommended reading in chapter 1. So let's look at chapter 2 today. We have completed 2.1 already. Let's look at assessment criteria 2.2. Okay, right. Now, this chapter is on market research. And we're going to learn a few things about how you would appraise the different sources of data that we use in marketing and in market research. So the assessment criteria in 2.2 talks about the types of data that you will use in an organization as well as externally. So when you're a marketer, remember your job is to be insightful. Your job is to ensure that you do everything based on insights and data. Okay? We build strategies, we build marketing plans based on data. So it is a data-driven solution or data-driven marketing strategies. So what are these kinds of data? We undertake market research and we collect broadly two types of data: secondary data and primary data. So in AC 2.2, we are going to look at the sources, these two types of marketing data: primary data and secondary data. Primary data and secondary data. Okay. So let me start by first defining what market research would be. Now, I'm sure you would have seen sometimes people on the street or in companies or in malls, people holding clipboards, a researcher trying to collect research, gather research. Today, the research industry is a little dead because you have online means of gathering data using social media channels, using WhatsApp and various other digital means, especially in websites or email surveys. Good old days, when I was a young marketer, we used to have market research companies who would go out there into the field and gather data. There is some level of work that is still being done in terms of field work. But today, it has been replaced quite a bit with email surveys, with things like SMS surveys, WhatsApp surveys, online surveys, web-based surveys, things like that, and of course, on social media channels. So what is marketing research? What is marketing research? By definition, marketing research is to systematically design, right? So you would design what we call a questionnaire where you gather data, right? You systematically design and execute certain initiatives to collect, analyze, and report data, information, and insights. Data, information, and insights to the management for specific decision making, right? So in summary, what it means is you will collect data, analyze data, and you will present data for management decision making. That's what it means, right? This is the definition. So you do it systematically. That means there is a process. There is a process. I will show you the research process. And in order for us to make informed marketing decisions, we need to make sure we gather accurate data, information, intelligence, insights. And it can be from various sources. It can be from the newspapers, It can be from government published sources like central bank reports, census and statistics department. It can be online, uh, email linked or LinkedIn linked data, Google Analytics. So you can gather data from anywhere. Maybe you can talk to a sample of your customers. You can invite them into an informal setting. We call that a focus group, which we will learn later. Or you can send them a questionnaire on email or WhatsApp and gather data. So there are so many methods that you can gather data. And all these methods are done for marketing decision making, to collect, analyze, and report data or intelligence so that we can make marketing decisions. So please study this definition. It is the definition of marketing research. So when we talk about a research process being systematic, we understand that market research has a process. So first, before you undertake any form of market research, your job as a researcher is to define the research objectives and what is a research problem. What are you trying to research? Are you trying to research as to why your sales are down and where your customers have gone? Have they migrated to other competitors, or have they stopped using your product for any other reason? So what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And you'll set some research objectives, goals. And then you'll develop a research plan. And in your research plan, you'll ask yourself, am I going to gather the data specifically through a questionnaire? Or am I going to work with the data that I already have in my database, right? So are you going to use internal sources of data, external sources of data? Are you going to use quantitative data, qualitative data, right? We will try and define all this a little later. So what is a research plan? And then you gather the data. Usually you'll gather it using a questionnaire, or there are so many other means which we will discuss. But you know what a question is. You gather the data, collect the data. And after you collect the data, this involves a little bit of experience. You need to use a software to analyze the data. So let's say if you're doing a research to understand who's going to win the election. So there's no point speaking to 10 people. You need to talk to a large number of people, maybe 10% of the Sri Lankan population. That's a large sample, right? 10% of the Sri Lankan population, 22 million. That's 2.2 million people you're going to talk to. So it's a large time. So if it's 5%, then it's 1.1 million, right? So if you gather questionnaires from 1.1 million people as to who is going to win the election, okay, it's a big study. So you have to put this in a software. And there are softwares called MyPLS, SPSS, right? These are statistical softwares which you will not learn in this course, right? But these are complicated softwares that researchers use to analyze data, especially from questionnaires, right? And these will throw out tables, charts, graphs, so that you can present the findings to your management. And the management would then make an informed decision. So it can be anything. You may want to find out why there is a behavioral change in your customers. I might want to find out your thoughts on the new syllabus that CIM has launched. We might want to understand whether your customers are price sensitive or not. So there can be so many research objectives or research problems where you would want to gather data. And usually companies do this when they're launching new products, or they're changing pricing strategies, or they're going into an international market, or sales are down, you need to figure out why. Service levels are bad, you need to understand why. Competitive activity has increased, and you want to determine how you're going to survive. So these are a lot of ways and reasons as to why you would gather data. And this is called the marketing research process. So broadly, there's two types of data collection. There's primary research and secondary research. We also call this primary data gathering and secondary data gathering. Okay. Broadly, there are these two types. There are some other types as well, like experiments, observation research. We will come into that before we finish the class, right? So we need to understand what is primary data and secondary data, right? So can I give you a very basic understanding, the difference between primary data and secondary data? So understand it very simply, okay? Now, if you have a research problem in an organization, and if you want to gather data, guys, the first type of data you look at is secondary data. We also call secondary data another name, desk research. Desk research. Why do we call it desk research? Because you can sit on a desk and complete the entire research. That's why it's called desk research, secondary research. So secondary data is the data that you already have. I'm defining secondary research or desk research. This is the data that you already have in your possession. Okay? The data that you already have, you don't need to go and gather new data using a new question. This is the data that you already have, either inside the organization or outside the organization. Data that you already have that you will use to solve a research problem. So example, let's say inside your organization, you might have a marketing department has a lot of records, sales records, invoicing, all that. Finance department has the annual report, profit and loss account, cash flow statement. They have a lot of records. HR department has a lot of data about the labor. Then production, manufacturing, all those departments have a lot of data about the operation. IT has also some data about online transactions and call center data. So these are all internal forms of research. So secondary research or desk research goes into two types, right? Let me explain it like this. Secondary research is two types. It will be internal research, where you can find within the organization or internal data, or external research or external data. So secondary research has two types. Within the organization, you can gather data from the different departments to see whether you can solve the research problem. Why? It is fast. You can sit on a desk and do it, right? It is cost effective. Primary research, on the other hand, is when you go outside and use a questionnaire or any other instrument to gather data. So it's time consuming, it's costly. You need a lot of resources for primary research. So always you will see whether you can solve the research problem using secondary research or desk research. If you can't solve the problem, now let's say if I want to find out why my web sales have gone down. If I go to do primary research where I give a questionnaire and administer it to thousands of customers, it's going to take a long time. Because that's a simple problem that I can do some simple desk research. I can go to my IT department, I can look at the logs of sales, I can see the history of transactions for the past 6 months. So I'm using internal data to solve that problem. External data can be the outside the organization, you have published information like the government department, central bank, census and statistics, newspapers, then you have industry reports. All the external data can also be used to solve the research problem. So inside the organization, internal data, outside the organization, external data. So if you can't solve the problem using desk research, either internal or external, then you need to go and gather data specifically to solve your research problem. We call that primary data or primary research, where you devise a questionnaire specifically to go and gather data. Okay. So primary data also there are types, we will come into that. Primary data also there are types, we'll come into that. So I hope you are clear. What is the difference? Marketing research has first a problem that you're trying to solve, a research problem. And usually you can solve most problems with desk research, sitting on a desk, looking at data, either internal data or external data. And there are sometimes you can't solve the problem using desk research, sitting on a desk. Internal data is not enough. External data won't solve the problem. You then need to commission a research. That's where you might even hire a research company, construct a questionnaire, gather data from a large sample of customers, statistically analyze it, and present it for management decision making. I hope it's clear. The two forms of research, primary research and secondary research. Okay, so let's go into now a deeper discussion and define secondary research and primary research. So as per the definition of secondary research, I told you secondary research is also known as desk research. It involves gathering data that already exists inside the organization internally or externally. It is done before primary research. You gather data before primary research because it's much cheaper, less time consuming, and also if it can solve the problem fast, right, and cost effective manner, you then can ensure you move on to the next marketing problem. So secondary research or desk research is always done first. Okay. So the opposite of that is when you gather data for the specific purpose, you go out there and gather data, right? That is called primary research. That is called primary research. But the biggest limitation of secondary research is this data that has been gathered already is from some other reason, right? So sometimes you can't 100% solve your problem. So that's one of the big drawbacks or limitations of secondary research. But it is affordable, cost-effective, and you can administer it really fast. So I spoke to you about the different types of internal and external sources of secondary research, right? So let's look at some of the internal sources first. You have internal databases, sales figures, call center reports, data from the finance department. And then you have online social media blogs, company blogs, or external social media analysis. You have government published reports, census and statistics department. I don't know if you have heard of them. Every country has a census and statistics department, right? Then you have central bank has so many reports that they produce every month, quarterly on the economy, as well as bi-monthly. Then it has once a year annual report. Then you have industry reports, trade reports. You can also look at competitor details, competitor data from their websites, from their annual reports. So you can see there's a lot of sources of internal and external data, secondary data, desk research, secondary data. And so many sources by reading newspapers, watching news on TV, by gathering data from competitors' annual reports, from their brochures, going and visiting their trade shows. So there are so many ways you can gather secondary data. Okay. Now, what is primary research? Primary research is also known as field research because you have to go to the field to carry out it, and you gather primary research specifically. So it's costly and time consuming, but the accuracy of primary research is very, very high because you are specifically going and carrying it out to solve that specific problem, time consuming and costly. but it is very accurate. The results will be very accurate. So primary data or primary research has two main types, right? Primary research or primary data has two main types. Just like secondary data has two main types: internal secondary data, external secondary data. Primary research has two main types: qualitative data and quantitative data, right? So what do you mean by qualitative and quantitative? When you go out to gather primary research as an interviewer, as a researcher, sometimes you will gather quantitative data through surveys, polls, opinion polls, questionnaires, observations, experiments, mystery shopping, quantifiable data. In other words, you gather numerical data, quantified data, right? Opposite of that is qualitative data, non-quantified data, right? So you gather through focus groups, in-depth interviews, and a technique called the Delphi technique, which we will learn. So you have qualitative data and quantitative data under primary research. And we will go into each of these types in the next few slides. So qualitative research, like I told you, is very simple. It is data that you gather that you cannot measure. The critical word here is measure. Cannot measure because it's qualitative. Now, I'll give you an example. If I ask you a question, why did you buy this type of shirt? If I use the question why, as a respondent, you need to explain, why did you buy this t-shirt? You have to say, I bought the t-shirt because it's a nice color and it was cost effective and it was on sale and I like the brand. Now you gave there a qualitative answer. But if I ask you instead of why did you buy this t-shirt, how often do you buy t-shirts? Then you say once a month. Now that's a quantitative answer. I hope you got it, right? So the first question gave a narrative response, a detailed answer. That is qualitative research. That is not measured. That's qualitative. If it's not expressed in numerical terms, it's qualitative, right? And it's useful to the marketer as it often explores people's feelings and opinions. So if I ask you, can you tell me what you look for when selecting a hotel for a holiday? Now, in answering that question, you can't say twice. You can't answer that question quantitatively. You have to say, I like to, when I go on vacation, I like to select a hotel where my children have enough space, where the food is good, the ambience are great, and the price is affordable, and if I have beach access. So now that is not a quantitative answer. Now there you explore qualitative feelings, opinions, attitudes. I hope it's clear, right? So qualitative data gathering involves narrative responses. Quantitative data is the opposite, measured numerical responses, right? So when we talk about qualitative data gathering, qualitative has few types. Can you see? Interviews, focus groups, and the Delphi technique. That's under qualitative data or qualitative research. So let's go into those three areas first. What do you mean by in-depth interviews? Now, can you see the picture here? This is actually a real picture from a research company. It's called LMRB, Lanka Market Research Bureau. This is the researcher and this is the respondent. This is a one-to-one discussion of a customer between the researcher and a customer who's giving feedback. Now, this researcher is representing a company. Can be Pizza Hut, can be Damro, can be a bank. So this researcher has a questionnaire, but the questions are asked. It's called a discussion guide, not a questionnaire, where questions are asked from this respondent. And the questions are open-ended, qualitative questions. Why? This, sorry, this researcher is probing behaviors, attitudes, opinions as to how this respondent will buy a product. What are the motivations? So you can see in doing that, you have to use a technique called probing. In qualitative research, you have to use a technique called probing. Right? Now, what do you mean by probing? Probing is, now this researcher might be asking this gentleman, okay, now usually when you start the research, you don't tell who your client is. You invite a customer for an in-depth interview to the research company, and this is a comfortable setting in the boardroom. Can you see here, these mirrors here? These are one-sided mirrors. So on the other side of the mirror, sometimes the client sits. So let's say the client is from a bank, right? So let's say the client is from Sampath Bank, right? So the Sampath Bank marketing guys are sitting on the other side of the mirror. Now, this client has been invited because he has 5 types of bank accounts, including a Sampath Bank account. Now, this client does not know, right? He has been invited saying, we'll pay you money or we'll give you a voucher, come for a small research. So he has come to the research company, and this researcher is asking questions. Questions like, can you tell us, in terms of banking, what are your preferred channels of banking and why you prefer those channels? Do you prefer the ATM? Do you prefer online, the mobile app? Or do you want to go and meet someone in the branch? So can you see that's a very narrative question, not a quantitative question. So using about 1 hour, this researcher will try to understand a lot of behavioral insights, opinions, attitudes of this respondent. But he doesn't know that the client is sitting on the other side. So he also doesn't know this client and this researcher represents Sampath Bank. They only know the banking industry. This is about this industry. So he doesn't know anything. So he has to give honest, genuine answers. Maybe at the end of it, he will know. Maybe the researcher will tell him. Sometimes may not. Because it doesn't matter. He has to give honest answers. So can you see how research is done? This is called in-depth interviews, gathering primary data by engaging respondents one-to-one. In-depth interviews are one-to-one. And you will ask open-ended questions where they can reveal deep, unexpected insights. So open-ended means you probe. Why do you go to the banks you go to? Why do you use the credit cards you use? Can you tell me why you use the ATM and the mobile app and not the other channels? Now, this word why, the more you use the word why, the respondent needs to explain, right? So if I ask you, why did you decide to do CI? Can you explain? Then you will give me an answer. Then you will say different reasons. But then why is marketing so important to you? Why not accounting? Why not HR? Then you'll give another answer. Then I'll say, but why do you think marketing pays you a high salary? So now by using this, by starting the question with this word why, you are probing. I hope you understood that. So you are going deeper and deeper and deeper as to why. So that guy has to explain and explain and explain. And you will record all that. Can you see this small recorder here? It will record all that. And the clients are looking at this conversation. Usually takes about 1 hour. And listening to the live conversation, you're recording. And you will analyze this data. You're gathering a lot of data from the customer. Right? This is called one-to-one or in-depth interviews. In-depth interviews. Qualitative probing. Open-ended narrative responses. Then you have a larger gathering, again qualitative. This is called a focus group, guys. This is called a focus group, right? Again, you can have some kind of thing here where on the other side the client sits, okay? But here now not one responder. From your target audience, you gather 6 to 9 respondents, right? Where a trained moderator, a researcher will ask questions not from one person, but from your target audience, you'll ask multiple people. Again, these people don't know the brand that this researcher represents. Maybe only know that this is about research. This is about an industry, let's say not banking, this is about the fast food industry. So this researcher represents Pizza Hut, but clients don't know that. But they have all been invited for a 1 hour discussion to the research company to share their opinions, feel no right or wrong answer. This is called a focus group. Involves inviting a small, carefully chosen group of people and a trained moderator, trained, a very skillful moderator, because it's not one-to-one. So many people you need to manage. There'll be egos. One person will try to dominate the conversation. You need to be really skillful to manage so many people. You have only 1 hour. You exchange views about the product, service, the organization, and the moderator needs to keep the discussion focused. And you have to record the data and gather all the insights. The difference between a focus group and an in-depth interview is focus group has 6 to 9 respondents, in-depth interviews 1-to-1. So there are advantages and disadvantages of both. Advantage in an in-depth interview is you can probe one person over and over again by asking question why, and you can go deep into uncovering attitudes, behaviors, opinions. But in a focus group, you can't do that. You can't go deep into one person, but you can get an overall view from a lot of people. But here still, it is open-ended narrative responses that you get from your customers, qualitative responses. I hope it's clear. So secondary research had 2 types, internal and external. And then primary research had 2 types, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative had in-depth interviews. Now we looked at focus groups. And next we're going to look at the Delphi technique. So what is the Delphi technique? Now it sounds a little funny, but let me try and explain this to you. Now, the Delphi technique is a superb technique actually. It's very, very famous. It is used a lot in complex research situations. Scientific, when you really want your results to be really accurate and scientific. So the Delphi technique is a process where you get experts, right? So now to a certain extent, Pizza Hut, you also got housewives, fathers, all that in the focus group. But here you get experts, let's say doctors, pilots, architects, you get experts, professionals, to gather several rounds of feedback, allowing them to modify their responses until a conclusion is reached by the panel. Delphi encourages collective intelligence. So let me try and explain this to you. An example of a Delphi technique would be when a team of medical experts is hired, right? Let's say you select about 10 medical experts. Let's say you select 10 cardiologists, heart-related doctors, cardiologists, 10 of them. And you bring them into a forum, right? And you ask them individual questions. Imagine 10 cardiologists. You ask them individual questions. And then you gather their individual responses. And then you put everything together. And then you go back and show them, here are all the responses. Now, looking at all the 10 experts' responses, we are going to ask you these questions again. Can you tell us what you feel about the same questions again? Are you wanting to modify your thoughts, your opinions? And then when you do that several rounds, you reach a consensus where you get individually, gather them collectively, go and show all of them. Here is the overall picture. Then they modify and change their opinions, and you again gather that data, and you again put it together and go back to them, right? So here's an example of the Delphi technique would be when a team of medical experts is hired to advise on whether a drug would be effective. It's a very serious, statistically valid research to treat a particular class of disease. They are each asked anonymously to give their opinion. So individually, they ask, what is your opinion about it, the drug? Then get to see what the others have said. Now you have individually got their opinion. Now you put it together and go and show all of them. So here's what all of you said collectively. Based on the new information, they update their responses. This process repeats 3 times until they reach a conclusion. So graphically illustrate. The facilitator gets a pool of experts, right? And then step 1, step 2, right? You have the facilitator and the team of experts, right? Step 3, experts respond to the request and receive feedback for their responses. Then you go into step 4, again you go into the facilitator. Facilitator compiles the responses and sends a revised set of questions to each expert. Several cycles of the feedback, as you can see, 4, 5, 6 will continue. And now you have got 3 rounds of collective information from 10 experts that they all buy into. And now you prepare the final report. Facilitator produces the report on experts' responses, noting key outlines. This is called the Delphi technique, used mainly in highly complex industries where the research needs to be fairly accurate. Let's now look at quantitative research. So let's look at quantitative research. Like we've discussed already, quantitative data or quantitative research is when you gather data that you can numerically measure. The responses, the answers are expressed in numeric terms, numbers. For example, a percentage of market share, the number of customers buying a product, or the number of calls made within a week. These are all methods in which you can measure quantifiable or quantitative data, right? So again, quantitative data, there are a few types together, quantitative data. Surveys, opinion polls, questionnaires, and then you have observation experiments and mystery shopping that come under quantitative sources, right? So let's try and delve into each one. So what do you mean by a questionnaire? As you can see, can you see this clipboard held by this researcher talking to a customer on the street? So this is a questionnaire, but it is not self-administered by the respondent. The researcher is asking the question and then ticking the answers, right? So it is a survey, it is opinion poll. So even questionnaires, surveys can be interviewer administered or self-administered, that is by the respondent. So if someone sends you an email without coming and talking to you on the street like this, these are traditional ways to do research. There are companies that still do that, go house to house and do research. But today you do it online, right? But now if you're doing a survey on who's going to be the next president, then you can't do it online, no? Because how many people have access to email in this country, right? How many people have smartphones to do WhatsApp or SMS? So you have to go to a statistically valid household segment in this market, at least cover 10% of the population. That's 2.2 million. So that is a door-to-door kind of operation across all the provinces, districts, Pradeshia Sabhas, Grama Sevaka areas of this country. So it's time consuming. It might take 6 months or 1 year to finish the research. You have to use trained interviewers. Can you see how complex primary data is? But you'll get very accurate details. So your survey will be fairly accurate. Okay. So broadly, to distinguish between the two types, qualitative research is to explore, is to understand, is to diagnose, gain insights, discover, develop, and to ask questions like why, how, narrative answers, qualitative. Quantitative research, this is from my book, How Many, right? To evaluate, to test, to measure. So this is the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. And then the second type, the first type was surveys, opinion polls, questionnaires. In your assessment criteria, in your syllabus, the second type of quantitative research is called observation. Now, observation is a very interesting form of research, right? I love this type of research. What do you mean by observation research? Right. So as you can see, observation research, guys, is when you observe people behaving. So now observation research can take place in a supermarket. It can take place where a researcher can use a CCTV and observe, like you can see here, customer behavior, right? Why does the customer always travel to the left in a supermarket and not go to the right? When you enter a supermarket, customers are always going to the left. Why not? Why don't they go to the right? Maybe all the essential products on the left. So why then can you distribute all the products right across the supermarket so that then they have to walk around all the aisles as opposed to only going to the left, checking out and going. So these are insights that you can find only through observation research. So observing. Now, there are some kind of sensitive research that you can't go and ask questions. Now, if you want to find out why people behave in certain settings. Now, there is, when you go to football matches in UK, since you are doing a British exam, okay, I have been to football matches in the UK, and it's quite scary because there is something called hooliganism. This word hooligans. That means in football matches, people go crazy. They are drunk. They are fighting. In the UK, okay, you're doing a British exam. It's called hooliganism. They don't know how to behave. They love football so much and they fight and they, they throw things. It's called hooliganism. Now, to understand why people behave like that, you can't go and give a hooligan a questionnaire. No? Can you go and give a hooligan a questionnaire or invite some hooligans to a focus group and say, ask, hey, why are you a hooligan? You can't do that, right? So to really understand the concept of hooliganism, you have to go and be a hooligan with hooligans. Got it? That's called observation research. And then whilst you are there as a researcher, you are disguised. They don't know you are a researcher. You also go and behave like that. And then you really come back and write your thoughts and present your paper. So observation research is a research technique where you observe participants or phenomena in their most natural settings. This enables researchers to see their subjects, make choices, react to situations in natural settings, as opposed to structured survey or focus groups. So as opposed to asking questions or you probe in a focus group or depth interview, here you go and observe why they behave in natural, true settings, and you come back and write your answers. I think this is why they behave like a hooligan. Okay, so that's called observation research. Okay, so Experiments. Experiments are another method. We call this experimental research. Now, some time ago, Walls ice cream, I don't know if you know this, Walls ice cream became Cargill's magic. Okay. So when I was studying marketing, Walls is an international brand, which was owned by Unilever. Internationally, Walls is owned by Unilever, right? So Unilever launched ice cream factory and ice cream brand in Sri Lanka. It was called Walls Ice Cream. And they actually, before they launched, they went and launched it in two areas, in Kandy and in Nigambo. So they selected two cities, Kandy and in Nigambo, and they gave Walls ice cream to some shops like this. For about 2 months, they did a small experiment, a test market, an experiment or a test market. So they only had a few branding in that locality. They put some merchandising, some freezers there. And they gave products, Walls ice cream, to maybe about 300-400 outlets in Kandy and in Nigambo to see for 2 months whether the product will move or not. Now that's called an experiment. It is in a controlled setting. Before you go and launch nationwide, you will see whether the people of Sri Lanka like Walls ice cream. Is the price point okay for them to buy? So if it doesn't work, then they won't launch it. But it did work and they launched it, right? So experimental research is gathering primary data by selecting groups in your target audience, giving them different scenarios or treatments, controlling certain factors. In the Walls case, they controlled the number of outlets, checking for different kind of behavior or responses. Experimental research tries to explain why people behave in a certain way, right? So that is an example. Experiments. Another experiment you can do is, let's say you want to find out about supermarket behavior from housewives. So now you want to see when they come into a supermarket, how do they behave? Which aisles do they go down to first? What are their payment methods? How long do they spend? How do they evaluate certain categories? Do they put things into the basket and put it back? Do they check the prices of everything before they put in the basket? So you want to check this from households. Now, you can go and observe this in the natural supermarket. But another way to do it is not observation, but experiment. You create a mock supermarket, a mini Cargill's for research purposes. So, and you invite maybe 20 housewives, right, to that mock experimental lab and say, we are giving you 50,000. Please shop for this 50,000 in this experimental lab. You will be observed and a small experiment is going on and we will ask you some questions if need be. So they will do their shopping and take their 50,000 worth of goods and go. And you have to then observe as much as possible. But that is an experiment because it's in a lab. It's a lab test. So maybe at the end of it, you'll ask them, why did you behave like this? Why did you check the price? Can you tell us why did you walk left? Why didn't you look at the down shelves? Why did you only look at the shelves on top? So these are called experiments. And then we learn what mystery shopping is, right? So mystery shopping is actually a very interesting technique, right? As you can see here. As the word goes, the shopper is a mystery. That's why it's called mystery shopping. Okay. Mystery shoppers, individuals employed by retailers and other service providers to experience and report back on the way actual customers are handled. I'll give you an example. When I was in the banking industry, in retail banking, we had close to 100 branches. We had close to 100 branches and I was handling the marketing. We had 100 branches island-wide, from Jaffna to down in the south to central province to eastern province to Colombo. So many branches, 100 branches, right? So now, how do we know that all these branches provide a consistency of service, right? I mean, we train people, but then how do we know that there is a consistency of service? So we employed a research company to do a mystery shopping exercise. What does that mean? That means this research company must send one person once every month, a researcher, in disguise of a customer. He's a mystery. This customer is a mystery. And he is a researcher. He will go into all the branches island-wide. His job is that. He will go into all the branches island-wide, and there is a checklist of things that he needs to check. When you went there, did someone greet you? How long did they take to greet you? Good morning, sir. How can I help you? Or did they ignore you? If so, they will come back. They will come back with their notepad and say, it took 5 minutes. No one took notice of me. No one greeted me. After I went and asked questions, they said, go and get the brochure. So that means the branch is very bad in their service. So can you see, this is called mystery shopping. A shopper in disguise, a mystery shopper, goes into all the outlets, comes back and says, here are your top 10 outlets, your branches. Here are your worst service branches. This is what they did. And then the management can make decisions based on who's best and who's worst. So for promotions and all that, you can take decisions, right? So when you talk about mystery shopping, is to use trained individuals to observe experiences and measure customer service responses, right? By being a mystery, like a prospective customer, acting, right? And undertaking some predetermined questions and tasks. That is a mystery shopper. I hope it's clear. Mystery shopping, right? So broadly, in conclusion, guys, what are the advantages and disadvantages of these research approaches? So when you look at observation research, there's limited researcher bias, right? Because you're not asking the respondent, you're observing the respondent. Relates to real behavior, but very expensive because you need trained moderators. Focus groups are good. You get a rounded, good blend of information, but you can't probe and go into very detailed discussion like in-depth interviews. But you also need a very skillful researcher because there are so many people, 6 to 9 respondents. Surveys, questionnaires, there are advantages and disadvantages. If you want it to be cheap, you can do a postal survey, an email survey, an email survey. And then you have also surveys in terms of WhatsApp surveys, web surveys, SMS surveys, postal surveys, right? But postal surveys, you need to give a very strong incentive for them to respond. Otherwise, people don't bother. Okay. And then experiments I spoke to you about. Right. There are advantages and disadvantages as well. So now I think you are now able to understand that market research is very important in marketing. And you are also able to understand that there are 2 types of market research, primary and secondary. There are 2 types of secondary, internal research or internal data, external research or external data. You first undertake secondary research. And then primary research is when you go out and gather data specifically to solve the research problem. It can be qualitative or quantitative. Okay, I hope it's clear. Let's now attempt the questions and do the mock exam and watch the video. I'll see you in assessment criteria 2.3.